In ministry, what are we supposed to do when we feel the bottom has fallen out of our lives? In this episode, I'm joined by Juanita Campbell Rasmus as she shares from her own experience of what she calls the crash and what her counselor calls a major depressive episode. Juanita is a pastor, a spiritual director, a nonprofit founder, and a writer. And together, we're going to look at some of the warning signs that we as pastors and ministry leaders need to be on the lookout for to make sure we don't spread ourselves too thin. Juanita's also going to share some important practices that can help center us in Christ, help us avoid burnout, or maybe tapping out of ministry altogether. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another insightful episode of FrontStage BackStage. I'm your host, Jason Daye, and every single week we bring you a conversation with a trusted ministry leader, all in an effort to help you embrace a healthy, well-balanced, sustainable leadership for your life and ministry. We're proud to be a part of the Pastor Serve Network, and you can dig in more deeply to today's conversation by going to pastorserve.org/network. Every single week, our team creates a toolkit that you can use yourself and with your ministry leaders in your local church to really learn more and to grow more deeply in the topic that we discuss. And so you can go to pastorserve.org/network and get those resources along with show notes and all types of resources and tools to help you in your growth as a ministry leader. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, hello, please take a moment to like this episode and drop your name and the name of your church in the comments below. We'd love to get to know our audience better. We'll be praying for you and for your ministry. And whether you're joining us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, be sure to subscribe and follow FrontStage BackStage so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And as I said, I'm very excited for today's conversation. I am joined today by Juanita Campbell Rasmus. Juanita, welcome to FrontStage BackStage.
Hey, what a pleasure to be here with you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I am excited to dive into our conversation. Juanita, you have served the church and serve the kingdom in so many ways. And I'm so appreciative that you are sharing your story with our audience today, because your story as a ministry leader really is one of stark reality, a total exhaustion,
Yes.
but absolute hope.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful story. And it started out as a typical day for your family, for you and your husband, your co-pastors of Thriving Church, August 27th, 1999. Juanita, share with us what happened on that particular day.
Well, as you said, it was a typical day. We had a young family. Our girls were in middle school at the time, and we had started a ministry 7 years prior with 9 members. At that point, it had about 3,500 members. And so that morning, as with most mornings during the week, we tried to make it special because it might be the only meal our family would enjoy together. And so, my girls were used to when they were reading the book Green Eggs and Ham, they had green eggs and ham. And when it was, Valentine's Day, their pancakes were heart-shaped, all those kinds of things in an effort to make our home life as normal as possible. Well, that particular morning after we had breakfast, my husband said, "Hey, would you like me to take the girls to school this morning?" I said, "Well, sure. That way I get an opportunity to put my makeup on in the bathroom mirror instead of the rear view mirror."
Right.
And many out there will know what I mean by that. And so, I kissed them all goodbye. They left and I went to the bathroom to finish my makeup. And all of a sudden, Jason, I felt so sick. I have never felt anything like the experience I had. I didn't know if I was getting the flu. I didn't know what was going on, but I picked up the phone. I called our secretary and I said, "I'm not feeling well. I think maybe I've just been moving around too fast this morning. And so I'll rest a little bit. Would you reschedule my appointments and I'll come in at noon?" And she said, "Sure." And so we hung up the phone and I literally began to experience what felt like an outer body experience. I saw myself pick up the home phone, hit redial, and say, "I'm not coming in. I'm going to take a medical leave or a sabbatical or something I hung up the phone and I proceeded to have what my grandmother would have called a nervous breakdown. Now, I began to sleep 18 to 20 hours a day, and that lasted for months. After about 2 weeks of that, my husband said, "Baby, something's wrong. This is not normal, right?" And it certainly wasn't normal for me to be sleeping like that. So I went to see my primary care physician. She ran a bunch of tests, did a bunch of blood work, and just tried to rule out everything, thyroid, hypertension, diabetes, all these known things that are, in my DNA, if you will. And she said, "Miss Rasmus, there's nothing physically that I can point to. And I'm going to recommend you might consider seeing a psychiatrist." Well, as best and quick as I could, I made arrangements to see a psychiatrist, which in my case, the person I called was booked. And so it took about 30 days to be able to see her. And once I did see her, she diagnosed me as having had a major depressive episode. Now, I have to say this: our narratives that bring us into ministry, they catch up with us. So often we think it's our gifts that bring us to ministry. I beg to differ. I believe it's our own need for healing that really draws us into ministry. The folks that stayed the closest to Jesus were the wackiest. They were the wildest. They were, Peter running out of his clothes because he sees his best friend, right? And so what I came to realize in the course of learning to live with a mental health diagnosis, learning to live with panic attacks, recognizing that I was going to need a team to help move me through and help me to get to a place of orientation after the rug had literally been pulled from under my feet. So I had a psychiatrist, I had a psychotherapist who I met with weekly to do talk therapy with, who I'm so grateful happened to be a Episcopal priest who had retired and become a young union analyst. So he understood what it was like to build a church and the demands and the personality types that even get drawn to this work. We can't deny those things, right? And so in that process, along with the spiritual director, I began what I call the course of the crash. Learning to Be is the book that came out of this. Learning to Be, finding your center after the bottom falls out. And so for me, this was very much the dark night of the soul. It was not just a biological, not enough dopamine and all that. It was that too, as far as the psychiatrist was concerned. But there were other elements. This was really the coming to the end of the Juanita who had been.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. It's probably a story that a lot who are listening in can resonate with to some degree. One of the things that you write about in your book, Learning to Be, is you talk about this idea that it's kind of early in your story, and you say, "Man, I loved God, I loved ministry, and I believe that God calls us to sacrifice." Right, to sacrifice for ministry. And as I read that, I really resonated with that because there is a measure of sacrifice that we are called to as pastors, as ministry leaders. I mean, even as Christ followers, all of us, right?
Exactly.
But whenever we look at kind of the idea of serving in a local church, there is this sense that we are called to sacrifice, and yet that sacrifice can become unhealthy.
Yes,
If left
exactly.
unchecked, that mindset of, we can stretch ourselves so thinly that we're not able to serve God and serve His church as He's called us to. So I'm curious, Juanita, as we're looking at this idea of sacrifice, could you share with us a bit about what you have discovered in regard to the sort of tension, the tension between sacrificing for God and for the kingdom, and yet also Jesus asks us to come and rest, right? And Jesus gives us life abundantly, right? So there is this tension between those two worlds. So share with us a little bit. What have you learned about that?
Well, first of all, Jason, one of the things I learned is that our narratives run deep. They can run generationally deep, all right? And so part of my reality was realizing that I'm a one on the Enneagram, and ones are rule followers. We believe rules are made by God and they must not be changed, right? Um, but I came to realize rules are made to be broken. There are points in our lives where the rules that we established in childhood no longer serve us as adults. And so part of this experience of living with a mental health diagnosis meant I had to investigate my narrative. There's one thing to say that I'm sacrificing for God, but the reality is, what does that really mean? What does that really look like? For me, I had to realize sacrificing for God meant that I understood Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. And that is in my intentionally sacrificing time to be with God, that God then in that space gives me clarity. Clarity on decisions I need to make, clarity on boundaries I need to set. I used to think that because I worked for God, I couldn't set boundaries. That meant people could call me any time of the day or night, that they could ask me to do anything. Pastor, could you teach this Bible study? Now, I was already teaching 2 Bible studies a week, plus Rudy and I, my husband, rotate preaching. And so either of us would be preaching the opposite Sunday, right? But because I had this understanding that I worked for God and that I should sacrifice, to me, I didn't realize that I did not need to crucify myself,
Mm.
that I could come off the cross because we could use the wood for other things, right? And so I think we have to question, what is it to us when we say, I'm going to sacrifice for God? Because the word says that Jesus said, I've come that you might have life, and what? Have it more abundantly, more expansively. I had to realize that Christ invited me to take time out to pray, to meditate, but also to play, to have fun.
Right.
That when I sacrifice the things that make Juanita, I enjoy creating crafts. I enjoy painting. I enjoy bike riding. I'm an adventurer. I have been made this way by God. So I love hang gliding and hiking and skydiving. And just recently I went, what do you call this? When you zip lining, I almost forgot the term. So I had to come to realize that God wasn't asking me to sacrifice the elements that made me me. What God was asking me to do was to sacrifice and prioritize time being with God so that I would know what it was I was to say yes to, and likewise, what it was I needed to say no to. I had to learn that no was as sacred as yes. Mark 1:35. I was so grateful one day. The Spirit in devotion led me to this passage where it says that Jesus got up early in the morning to pray, went out to pray, right? And so there he is praying. And one translation reads this way: and the disciples hunted for him. So they came and they said, hey, Jesus, the platform is ready. The mics are set. The sound system is go. We've got the video cameras ready. The praise team is just finished. Come on, get on the stage. And Jesus said, I'm going to the next town. That's why I've come out. Meaning, I haven't come out of prayer because you interrupted me. I've come out of prayer because I understand my assignment. You see, sacrifice means understanding our assignment. Because the sacrifice at times is going to be the sacrifice of saying no when the crowd wants us to say yes.
That's
The sacrifice
good.
at times is going to be recognizing that There's some things we're going to be saying yes to that the crowd wants us to say no to. You remember how many times the Jews came to Jesus and said, tell us about this woman who's been married, and tell us about this person caught in adultery, constantly wanting Jesus to be on their side. Sacrifice for us as leaders mean we invest enough time with God that we're able to stand in the places that are uncomfortable. And that becomes our sacrifice.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. I love that. I love the way that you frame that, because we can get caught up in the idea of sacrifice in such a way that it really damages ourselves, our own health, our relationships. It damages the opportunities that we have even in ministry. You share as kind of in retrospect, looking back on the early years of ministry. And as you said, your church was thriving. You and your husband doing some incredible work there in Houston. And but you recognize that there was some imbalance in your life in ministry. And so one of the questions I have for you, Juanita, is what are some things that we as pastors, as ministry leaders, should really kind of be on the lookout for in our own lives? Because many of us have a tendency really to focus on really getting things done because God's mission is big. God's mission is important. We have a natural sense of urgency, right, for ministry. And so what are some of those things, some of those warning signs maybe that you would suggest we keep an eye out for that might indicate we're stretching ourselves too thin and we're entering kind of the danger zone?
Thank you. Oh man, that's such a good question. I wish that I'd had a conversation like this with someone before my crash, right? So one of the things, and I can just put it simply this way, notice what you're noticing. You ought to know yourself better than anybody else. All right. So as an example, notice when you're postponing fun and you're putting it on the back burner. We need fun. We need restoration, and it can come out of recreation. The ability to make time and space so that in play we can be recreated for the work that we're being called to do. So notice, number one, when you put play and fun on the back burner. And somebody might be saying, well, I've never been a person that enjoyed play. Okay, so it's time to learn. Okay. We're being transformed by the renewing of our mind. All right. If we're talking about living a harmonious life. Now, I took the word balance out of my vocabulary because I find that I am living a rhythm, a little ebony keys, a little ivory keys, and there's a beautiful rhythm that gets created. And sometimes there's some high notes for a minute or two, and then sometimes there's some low, but they work together for my good. So number one, notice what you're noticing about your willingness to give up the fun, to give up the things that you really enjoy. And maybe you wouldn't say it's fun. Maybe it's the fact that you really enjoy reading certain kinds of novels, romance novels or crime thrillers or whatever. Notice when you begin to take the things that give you life and joy off your schedule. When you don't schedule time for fun and play, for recreation in whatever ways that are life-giving to you, you're setting yourself up for a fall, for disappointment, certainly. In my case, a diagnosis. The second thing I would say, and I will give it to you in the acronym of HALT. H is for hungry, A is for angry, L is for lonely, T is for tired. I mentioned this in learning to be a dear friend of mine who is a coach in recovery and has been coaching people through their sobriety for almost as long, probably as long as we've been in ministry, 30 years now. And her name is Regina Hassan. And Regina taught me the acronym HALT. Don't allow yourself to get too hungry. Now, I want to break hunger down into two things. Physically hungry, yes. Because when we get too physically hungry, we'll eat anything, right? And many of us are aware that it's probably best to consider eating more live food than processed stuff, right? But when I get too hungry, I'll grab whatever shows up at the donut shop or at the fast food place because I have not prioritize my need to have a lunch break, right?
All right.
Notice these things. The second part of hunger is emotional hunger. When I am hungering for something like laughter in a funny movie, when I'm hungering for getting outside in nature. So often when I do spiritual direction with people, and especially guys, men will say, I'll ask them, okay, so what is it that you do to just get away, to relax, to unwind? And a lot of times they'll tell me stuff like fishing, right? And I'll say, okay, well, when was the last time you went fishing? Well, when you have to stop and think about the last time you went fishing, it's been too long.
Right.
So don't allow yourself to get too hungry for the things that give you life. Now, I remember one of the last things a pastor said to me was, well, the guy that I like to go fishing with has been really busy. And so we haven't go. I'm like, hold up. Either get a new fishing buddy during this time or you become your own fishing buddy, okay? Because we need that downtime. We need it, okay? So the A in the acronym HALT or the acrostic is anger. Notice your anger. I'll also say, notice your anxiety, all right? When we allow ourselves to push our anger down because we don't think we should be mad, right? When we allow ourselves to ignore our anger, as though it's not going to come seeping out in some way, fashion, or form, right? Notice your emotions, anger, anxiety, and then notice what decisions you seem to be making. I was speaking last night on a forum, and I said that many of us have been westernized and puritanized into believing that we shouldn't have emotions, and particularly anger. The scripture says, be angry, but what? Sin not. In other words, don't do something you're going to wish you hadn't done because you're so mad. Here's what we're invited to do. I'm reading a wonderful book and I'm really studying it by Dr. David Hawkins. It's called Letting Go. He uses this technique of how to sit and hold an emotion. Be with it. Be present to it. But allow it to do what it needs to do. And that is, it's going to come to a heightened place where you're going to feel like you're going to be overwhelmed by that feeling. And it's kind of the picture of childbirth. The contractions get great and strong. And then there is the delivery. Those feelings begin to decrease. He says that if we will practice the letting go technique, feel what we feel, and then allow it to ebb and flow, we will find that we won't be holding on to these emotions. We'll be releasing them. And so we'll stop being containers. We'll become conduits of our emotions. So notice what you're noticing about your anger, your anxiety, your emotions. Then the L. The L is lonely. Not allowing ourselves to get too lonely. Create some circle groups, some friendship groups. Well, I'm so grateful. But, I'm saying all this after the fact, right? After the fact, I realized my husband and I were very lonely in ministry. That can set you up to threats against your marriage. It can set up threats against your commitments to relationships. Because you find yourself saying, well, I can't meet with my friends because I've got to prepare for this meeting or prepare for this sermon. Notice when you're putting relationships, friendships on the back burner. And so don't allow yourself to get too lonely. And I'm going to say this, schedule your hunger, emotion, and relationship time, just like you schedule everything else. Schedule. So one of the things that happens for me is that I created several groups. One of them at the time, because we were parents, was a parent group, and I call us the PIPs, Partners in Parenting Siblings, because we all had children. We were all women who would get together every so often for tea, and probably about every 6 weeks or so, we get together for tea, and we would talk and we would share and we would be present to each other. Then I also had a prayer group. two women who are also clergy women. The three of us get together. We call ourselves Trois Swears. As you can tell, I like titles and names. And so Trois Swears is French for three sisters, all right? God brought us together during a crisis in my life, and we have prayed each other through so much stuff. And one of the things that has been a great joy is that when we come together, we're celebrating life. We're celebrating being with each other. And then we spend a little time, we invest, I prefer to say invest, a little time interceding together for each other. And so create circles of life for yourself. Create circles. You know, a member of our church invited my husband and I out to hear his orchestra perform. I didn't even know he was in an orchestra. This gentleman was in his 80s, y'all. And here's what he did. After his wife died, he began to create circles of interest for himself. One of the circles was joining a local orchestra. Guess what his instrument was? You'll never guess.
What?
The triangle. You see, you don't have to be the chief cello player. You don't have to be the front row saxophone player. You don't have to be the orchestra conductor, but find you a circle of interest where you are engaged, where you're enlightened and invigorated. You see, what I didn't know before the crash is that over time I had allowed the emphasis of ministry to be the priority for everything in my life. And it sucked the life out of me, and it took the joy out of me as well. The T in HALT, hungry, don't get too hungry, don't get too angry or anxious. Notice what you're noticing. Loneliness, notice what you're noticing. Get some circles of interest. If you're into, my son-in-law loves scary horror movies. I do not. You'll probably never see a horror movie with him, right? But he loves them. Get into a circle of other people who love horror movies. A lot of people are into gaming. My future son-in-law loves gaming. I'm not into it, but he's teaching me a few little games, right? Some circles of interest so that you don't get too lonely. And then the T is tired. Notice what you're noticing about your exhaustion levels. I was exhausted and I didn't even know it. I remember one day I was in the car and I was driving to church, and there's a particular street that I was coming down, and the street dips down because it goes under a railroad track. And so I was in the deep decline of this hill, right? Or whatever you want to call it. And so there was a car in front of me and several cars in front of that car. I was so wound up because I was so exhausted that I brought an incense from the house and I brought a meditation tape to play while I was driving. Now, I want you to know that almost every meditation tape says, or CD, in this case it was a CD, do not play this meditation CD while operating vehicles. I saw it, I stuck it in anyway because I'm trying to find something that's going to help me because I'm so wound up and exhausted. I don't know how to relieve this. And I don't even, it's not even in my awareness that I should take some time off and rest and recuperate. That wasn't even because I was an addict. I was addicted to people pleasing. I was addicted to performing. I was addicted to needing other people's acceptance and approval. Notice your narrative. Notice what you're saying to yourself. Notice what's driving you. I was tired and I didn't know a way out. So I lit this incense. You know how you push the cigarette lighter in and it pops out. And so I lit the incense and now I got my foot on the brake because we're at a stoplight. And I'm holding the lit incense with one hand on the steering wheel. Now something's not right with this picture, right? And I'm holding the cigarette lighter. I dropped the cigarette lighter and I took my foot off the brake, so I hit the car in front of me.
Oh my.
And that was just one of 3 fender benders I was in about 30 days. Notice what you're noticing. When we're exhausted, we're not making best decisions. When we're exhausted, we're not at our best. When we're exhausted, we need to give ourselves permission to back up, slow down, and get the necessary rest we need. Halt. Notice what you're noticing. Notice when you're taking all the fun, all the things that really give you joy. If you love golf, go play golf. And not always with church members. Find a group that's not in your church. Because there are times you need to say, oh, you don't need it to get back to the trustees. You don't need it to get back to the SPRC, the staff parish relations, or your bishop. Create circles that can support your interest. Don't get too hungry because you can get hangry. Don't allow yourself to get too angry, too anxious. Notice what you're noticing. Get the support you need. Don't get too lonely. Create circles of interest. Don't get too tired. Put spaces of respite, spaces of rest. As an example, one of the things I do now is I schedule all of my talking on Tuesdays and Thursdays, all of my podcasts, all of my interviews, all of the teaching Tuesdays and Thursdays. Why? Because it gives me some flexibility to not start my day at the crack of dawn on Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. Monday is my off day. I'm off. I'm off. And I honor that. You see, if you can't be true with yourself, you won't be true with anybody else. If you won't honor the commitments you make to yourself, you will, in many cases, find yourself not honoring over time the commitments you make to others. Shakespeare said it this way: to thine own self be true.
Yeah, that's good. That's so helpful. That acronym, that whole acronym, I think really helps us kind of understand some of those things, like you said, that we need to be noticing, right? In our own lives, and so some red flags, different
Exactly.
things, warning signs that we are, in the danger zone.
That's right.
So one of the things, Juanita, that you shared, and you shared this in your book, Learning to Be, is this idea that not only are there things that we can identify in our lives that could be problematic, or could become problematic if left, untouched,
Yeah.
but there are some practices, some contemplative practices, some spiritual practices that can help kind of recenter us and ground us.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, as we're kind of closing down this conversation, so much what you share has been so helpful. But I was wondering if you could offer the pastors and ministry leaders who are watching or listening in some, just maybe a few different practices that we can, if we're recognizing these things in our lives,
Yeah.
how do we recenter ourselves? What are some things that would be helpful?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. So in Learning to Be, after each chapter, I try to offer a practice of some sort that's been of help to me. So one of them is this: the examine. St. Ignatius of Loyola taught the practice of the examine to his monks, who were also bivocational. You could say they were monks by night, but they also had some kind of gig during the day. And so the reality is they might miss mass. They might not be able to make it to the hours of prayer. But he said, do not neglect the practice of the examine. When you're preparing for bed, leave yourself 15 minutes so that you're not so exhausted that you have to go to bed. And so with the examine, I sit usually in a chair and I take some deep breaths and I ask myself two questions. Number one, what gave me life today? And I reflect over my day. I ask the Holy Spirit to help me see places in my day that might have been life-giving. Maybe it was a compliment somebody paid me, and maybe I didn't even notice it because I was in my head all day, right? Maybe it was a moment. So as an example, yesterday I had the chance to do some coloring with my grandson. He's 5 years old. And so we sat together at the kitchen island, and he colored his things and I colored my things. And it was so life-giving. We weren't really even talking. We were just being present. So what gives you life? Notice those things. And then St. Ignatius would say, and do more of them. Now, the second question is, what drained me? What took life from me? Pay attention. Ask the Spirit to help you to go through your day. Notice those places where maybe you were a little short with somebody, or notice the places where you felt that you really weren't present in a conversation because you were thinking about something else. Notice the things that weren't life-giving. I'll give you a quick example. I have a member of our church that for years, because I didn't know the examine, would engage me in conversation, and it would always leave me drained. And I wouldn't have anything else to offer anybody, not even myself, when I finished the conversation. And so what I learned to do is, number one, stop asking this person how they were doing, because that okay. So instead, I would say, hey, what did you do this week that you would love to do again? All right. Then the second thing I did in terms of setting boundaries, I limited the time on the conversation. All right. This person gets 7 minutes. 7 is the time of completion. All right. Sometimes it's 10, but it's got to be good energy. If it's not, hey, it's been a joy being with you. I look forward to the next time we'll talk again. Make it a great day. All right. Now, so the examine what gives you life, what takes life from you, and then do more of what gives you life, and what less of what takes life from you. The things that you say, well, I have to do this X, Y, Z. Well, how can you do it differently? Stay open to new ways. Now, here is a breathing meditation I'd like us to do. I invite you to sit up tall and straight in your seat. I invite you to put your feet flat on the floor and turn your hands palm side up in the open and willing to receive position, and lay them on your thighs. And so I invite you to take a deep breath, breathing in deeply and fully in through your nose, bringing that breath all the way down into the gut so that your tummy is expanding with every inhale. Now, that's going to take a little practice, but you can do it. Now, exhale deeply and slowly through your mouth as though you're blowing through a straw. Again, breathing in deeply and fully in through the nose. And if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If not, that's fine. Exhaling deeply and slowly through your mouth as though you're blowing through a straw. As you're breathing in, notice the cool air coming into your nostrils. Notice it. Be with it. And on the exhale, notice the warm air exiting your mouth. On the inhale, notice your feet on the floor, breathing in deeply and fully. Exhaling deeply and slowly. On the inhale, notice your bottom is supported. Your assets are being supported by a chair or whatever you're sitting on. Notice that on the inhale. And on the exhale, notice the warm air exiting your mouth as though you're blowing through a straw. Breathing in deeply and fully God's light and love. I invite you to exhale all thoughts that no longer serve you. Just let them go. Continue to breathe in deeply and fully, breathing in the awareness that the breath of life is flowing freely through you. Exhaling deeply and slowly, letting go of any thought that is holding you captive. Just let it go. Thoughts can be changed. You can change your thoughts around whatever it is that's been creating stress for you. What's a new way to see that thing? Again, breathing in deeply and fully God's light and love. Exhaling all chaos, all confusion, all self-doubt. And now I invite us to close this brief breathing meditation with 3 deep inhales and 3 deep exhales, breathing in deeply and fully. Exhaling with an awe. Ah. Second deep breath, breathing in deeply and fully. Exhaling with an audible ah. Ah. Thirdly, breathing in deeply and fully. Exhaling with an audible ah. Ah. Gently and slowly begin to open your eyes when you're ready. And I tend to do that breathing practice between every call, every conversation. I take a moment and breathe. So often we think when the phone rings, we have to answer it on the first ring. And if you were in sales like I was before ministry, you were taught catch it before the third ring. Well, heck, if you need to let it ring 7 times, what if it goes to voicemail, just so you can give yourself a moment to pause, to notice what you're noticing, to be present to yourself, and to give yourself the kind of generosity that you no doubt give to those you serve. You see, our challenge is not about doing. As pastors, as leaders, our growth opportunity is in learning to be.
That's excellent. It's beautiful. Thank you, Juanita, so much.
Mhm.
As we are closing down right here, just last words that you would have to pastors, ministry leaders, words of encouragement as they're watching along and listening in. What would you say to your brothers and sisters?
I want to say this on page 28 and 29 in Learning to Be. I talk about my personality type, which is a 1 on the Enneagram, and I say this. This is a quote to the personality type that serves in leadership and ministry. The advice of the desiderata sounds foolish and dangerous. Here's what it says. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it's clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. I hope today's time will help you to remember that the universe loves for you to have fun, that the universe is longing for you to notice what you're noticing, so that which gives you life, you'll do more of it. And that which takes life from you, you'll do less of, or find new ways of thinking about those things. Make it a great day, expansive and filled with joy. How about that?
That sounds good. That sounds good. Christ is our joy. What a blessing it is to be with you, Juanita. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And for those of you who are watching and listening along, you can once again go to pastorserve.org/network. There we'll have links to Juanita's books and ways that you can connect with her and with her ministry, as well as that toolkit, so you can dig more deeply into this amazing conversation that we just had. So God bless you, Juanita. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
It's been a great joy. Make it a great one.
Awesome. God bless you.
And likewise you.
Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide. And we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process. providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.